But speaking of spreading some things around, we don't want to spread misinformation, Brian, right? We do not want to do that here on the program. And you, a couple of weeks ago on one of these shows, said something about my Christmas poems and said, well, you ought to read those for Christmas. And I said, well, I guess I might. And then we never have. So this is the last opportunity we've got to make sure that we fulfill our word to the people out there, the cult of Cornette. Should I read my Christmas poems?
I believe this should be an annual show tradition for the last show of the year.
Where I just sit there, can you imagine yourself next to a roaring fire with the stockings hung with care and all kinds of candy gobbledygooks in them, and I'm sitting here in an overstuffed easy chair reading my Christmas poems.
The way Darlene Love was on Letterman every year singing Christmas Baby Please Come Home, this will be that annual tradition here on the Drive-Thru.
Baby Please Come Home, Baby Please Come Home. Was it that tune?
That wasn't it.
That wasn't it? Well, anyway, and now I know a lot of people are saying, why in the world does Jim Cornette have a Christmas poem? Well, the answer is these were written quite some time back, and we've covered this period in my career on various programs before. You can find it on YouTube, but suffice it to say that Christmas of 1988, Crockett Promotions had just been sold to Turner Broadcasting System, and more importantly, the Midnight Express and I individually, and a lot of the other wrestlers as a group, had found out that they were not going to get all or part of the money from Crockett Promotions that they were owed on their contracts. And I've mentioned also that, my gosh, until we found out what was going to happen with TBS owning the thing, we thought about, oh, shit, we're going to go on doing what we've been doing. But now the owner of the company has network cable television and plenty of money, and we won't have to worry about, this Jimmy Crockett's plane falling out of the sky because he can't afford the maintenance or whatever, right? We were optimistic is what I'm trying to say. And because that happened on November 1st, right? That's when TBS officially took over. And I believe about that same time, we got me and the Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. We got our checks from Jimmy Crockett, the final settlement on our contracts to that point in time. And he owed us $66,000 and we got $40,000. That means he got us for $26,000, which, by the way, is somewhere in today's money close to $70,000 each, right? So we were a little cranky about that. And I was about ready to start doing my Christmas cards. Brian, you remember I used to send it. Back then, you had everybody's home address, mailing address. There was no email, thank God. And people still sent Christmas cards, and it said, I sent out probably 150 or 200 of them at this time of the year back then. And so I wrote a little Christmas poem to send along with the Christmas card to the people that were in the business, or I gave it to the boys, in Charlotte, etc. And that was the origination of this poetry here that we're about to hear. Does that kind of sum everything up for those who might be hearing about this for the very first time?
I think so, and I will say I still have all my old Christmas cards from you. They were something you look forward to because it wasn't just a card. It was always something funny. It was always something to pop you.
Well, yes, because you can only send so many pictures of Jesus hanging on something or, Christmas trees, and there needs to be some pizzazz to it. But anyway, that's why this year in 1988, or this time of year, Christmas 1988, I wrote, "'Twas the night before Christmas 1988. Do we have a drum roll here? Wait a minute. Hold on. What if I can? I just thought I wish I could do this sounding like Vincent Price or Boris Karloff, but maybe the material will make up for it. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Like to hear it? Here it goes. "'Twas the night before Christmas and Jim Crockett was broke. All the creditors were stirring. They couldn't find the old bloke. The lawsuits were filed by the attorneys with care, but it was all for nothing. The money just wasn't there. The wrestlers' credit ratings were dying or dead, while visions of big contracts danced in their heads. And Dusty in Texas, thinking that he was through, was plotting to kill the big pay-per-view. When then from the dressing room there arose such a clatter, they sent poor Johnny Weaver to see what was the matter. "We want our money," said the Warriors with a growl, "and we're going to get it through fair means or foul." "Better luck than we had," said the Express with disgust. "The only thing left in his pocket is dust." Away to the box office they all flew in a flash, thinking they could snatch the big handful of cash. But the gate had been killed by a dozen no-shows when half the talent decided to New York they should go. When what to our tear-filled eyes should appear but Jim Crockett himself, smelling strongly of beer. With plane tickets in hand that were purchased so cheaply, we knew in a moment they were issued by Lindsay. And he wheezed and he belched and he called us by name. On Rotunda, on Steiner, on Rogers and Fulton, on Stinger, on Luger, on Ivan and Sullivan. Move on to Atlanta, things will be better. The travel's out of there, didn't you get my letter? As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, the sheep herders ran off before he bled them dry. But Crockett didn't care how many followed their tracks. Rhodes was in every angle, he could pick up the slack. And even though Flair was world heavyweight champ, he couldn't get a pin over a kid in summer camp. It seemed that the boys would never get their due, even though so many had threatened to sue. And contracts were settled for way less than half. Up in Greenwich, it seemed Grinch Vince would have the last laugh. When in came Ted Turner with money and power and rescued Jim Crockett at the very last hour. Offices were closed, incompetence fired, power plays won, and executives hired. And of the departed, many of you know who. TBS people said, what the hell did they do? We can find no reasons but nepotism and insanity for these folks to have jobs. That's what caused this calamity. And then the revolution was finally completed, and the talent felt at last they would be fairly treated. Here we go, dramatic foreshadowing. Some problems remain to be smoothly worked out, but the boys will get paid, at least of that there's no doubt. But what of Jim Crockett, you ask one more time? Didn't he have to pay out his very last dime? Only if you don't happen to count the millions in his personal Swiss bank account. Then raising his finger, spilling scotch from his glass, and telling us all to kiss his rosy red ass, he was heard to exclaim as he snuck out of sight, 40 cents to all, and to all, fuck you.
Wow. It's amazing listening to that now and listening to you read it now, because you realize there's so much in it, and it really is you as frustrated as ever. I mean, there are frustrations at Dusty's booking in there. Were the Road Warriors the first ones to openly complain about this? Because you were the first, they were the first team you mentioned in here, obviously.
Well, I think they just, it fit the flow of the rhyming, but no, they were very independent about their money. They had gotten the biggest contract that Crockett ever signed, even bigger than Luger's. They were at
when? So that would have been in 87?
86, I think. Whenever they came full time, 250 dates at $2,000 a date a piece. So they each got $500,000 guaranteed, and Paul got $250.
And they still got to go to Japan.
And they still got to go to Japan when they had time in between those 200, because they had another 115 days. And then they started getting mad when TBS started. They booked that's, I think, one of the original things that led to their departing, like Billy Martin, was when they wanted them to keep the same money but work more dates, or they had ended up booking them on a bunch of dates and had to pay them more because they ran out of dates before they ran out of year or something. And then that's when Herd finally pissed them off bad enough that it ran them off.
But there's other names that you sprinkle in there. Weaver, obviously Johnny Weaver, and he had a role in The Office. Lindsay.
The travel agent. She later married J.J. Dillon.
Oh, no shit.
Bless her little heart. It unfortunately did not last to present day. But
so how old were you when you wrote this? 1988.
Christmas of 88, 27.
So when you look back now on what you wrote when you were 27 and you were at the height of any frustrations you were going to have with a lot of these people, really, because you would kind of mellow with a lot of it as years went by. What do you think looking back? What do you remember? What do you think? What do you think you were too harsh on? What did you get right? What were you not firm enough about?
Well, no, I wasn't harsh enough probably on, the whole goddamn. I was trying to pop a lot of the boys in the locker room with referencing Johnny Weaver. We all loved Johnny Weaver and Flair loved this. Murdoch liked it so much that the year he passed away, I reprinted them and sent them out in all my Christmas cards in his honor. Because he fucking hooted over them. But it was just to tickle the fucking boys, right? Because what's Jimmy Crockett going to do to us now? He ain't the boss anymore, right? I'll make fun of him in my Christmas card. He got 26 grand of our money, right? That he had promised us. But what I didn't realize, we assumed, and when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, that the only problem was that they didn't have the money, Crockett, to compete with Vince. We thought, oh, TBS, now we're great. We didn't realize they would fucking dismantle the whole goddamn thing and make everybody so miserable they wouldn't be competitive for fucking 8 years. So that's why I had to kind of update this one a couple years later with the 1990 version.
How do you
Go ahead.
Well, just before you get to 1990, how do you compare the optimism you had there for a Turner purchase of the company to the optimism that was there around the formation of AEW?
What? It's really, unfortunately, it's not comparable because I think the optimism when Turner bought Crockett, we already had an ongoing promotion with a full talent roster with a history that was actually successful and was still being successful. The problem had not ever been, as we've talked about, the wrestling product. The problem had been the decisions that they made and the things they spent money on. They still lost money, even though we were drawing at houses at the arenas and people were watching the television. So the realistic expectation that we all had was that if this thing is well financed, we can compete with Vince because we kind of already have been. But the expectations around forming AEW was like for a lot of not only the fans, but also for the boys, this is our only chance to ever get paid and make big money in this business and work for a billionaire. And holy shit, this is an all or nothing proposition. We didn't know at the time that TBS was going to mismanage the thing like they did, but it was an ongoing, successful, competitive product that just needed money and better management. It got the money and it got worse management. So the formation of AEW was like, oh my God, they're all clinging to a lifeboat. It was different, I think.
Well, that was your 1988 poem. 1989 was a year that started out not so hot. And then by the end of it, you were on the booking committee. I don't know how hot that was at the end of 1989, but you were in a better position than you had been. So 1990 is a year later. You have now Christmas 1990 is 2 months after you quit WCW.
I am out of there. Not even a full 2 months. And actually, I wrote this at the beginning of December. I didn't write it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you have your release yet, or you did not have your release yet at that point?
I found it when I went through my files last Christmas time. When I had some time, I actually found the release. I don't know that I had it yet because we walked out, what was it, the 30th of October. I wrote this sometime around Thanksgiving time because I had to mail all my cards out. What was Jim Herd going to do? Sue me for a fucking poem and a Christmas card? I'd already told him I'm going to do what the fuck I want. And you can either send me a release or you can sue me. And I said, you can put in the release, I'm not going to the WWF because I'm not going to the WWF. Otherwise, I'm going to do what I want. Respect my authority. And he just he was glad to be out of that too. And he just sent me a release, didn't say anything about the WWF. But nevertheless, the point is this time I had a lot more time on my hands. In 1989, on the booking committee, Even though I had some disgruntlements, I didn't have time to write my name down, much less anything else besides what we were doing. But now I've been off all month of fucking November, and I thought I ought to revamp this son of a bitch. And this one actually ended up a little bit longer because I went and I've tried to make it even flow more like the original poem, which, by God, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas is a long fucking poem. Have you ever read the whole goddamn thing?
No, I'm Jewish.
Well, it doesn't mean you can't read a goddamn book.
I'm not going out of my way to read The Night Before Christmas.
Well, I did, because it's all, with the Charles Dickens shit and all that stuff. It's in the classics.
Dickens
But it's a long
Schmickens.
poem.
Yes.
Dickens Schmickens, who'd he ever beat? All right. The Grinch That Stole Wrestling, 1990. 'Twas the night before Christmas, 2 years after the bye, and the state of pro wrestling would bring a tear to your eye. We're changing the scripts, the New York Times quote had read. All the secrets were out, and pro wrestling was dead. All the grandiose visions of lights, glory, and fame, of million-dollar pro wrestling achieving national acclaim, had been supplanted instead by what the corporate world had borne, a farce of pro wrestling, deserving only of scorn. Oh, at first they had tried very hard, but they hired a VP who had little regard for the business to which so many others were committed. He knew not the first thing, but he would never admit it. When suddenly from the office there was such a big fight, they sent James E. Barnett to help out if he might. He returned with pale face and a trembling hand. Yet another of our bookers has been promptly canned. We'll depend on the champ, the few faithful did think. Ric Flair has saved many from a sea of red ink. Away to Charlotte they went with anticipation, knowing Flair could light fires under the whole wrestling nation. But the brains in Atlanta had closed the mine of gold. Who wants to see Flair? He's 10 years too old. Then what strange sight did our shocked eyes meet? But Jim Herd himself, his face red as a beet. With contract in hands given out to unknowns, we knew in a moment all our hope had just flown. And he ranted and raged, and he called out these names. On Funk, on Steamboat, on Warriors and Flair, on Midnight, on Cornette. Get the hell out of there. You must step aside for these faces that are new. We'll draw 20 million with this musclehead stew. The Clash ratings proved, believe you me, we can sell this green talent if the show is for free. As rain clouds dry up in the hot desert sky, the attendances dwindled, ratings began to die. TBS didn't sit still, no, they planned their attack. No blood, no violence, that'll get these crowds back. And even though Watts was a phone call away, they couldn't have that. Why, he'd get in the way. Because after all, as part of his deal, he'd want the fans to think wrestling matches are real. So into their skulls another notion did fly. We'll make sillier shows that all the kids will buy. Hence action the fans continued to crave. Up north it seemed Vince had dug a similar grave. When that cranky old herd found a foolproof new plan, he hired Moldy Oldie, wrestling's grumpy old man. Morale dropped lower, old cronies were brought in. Even with an old hand, it seemed no one could win. Whatever knack had been had way back when, by Oldie for booking, had left him by then. The best to be done by that sarcastic old rat was a heel who pulled rabbits out of his scorpion hat. Anybody want to draw? Chip Burnham's trademark line was reduced to, here's 20 and a pitiful whine. The ship sank slowly with all hands on board while Nero Herd fiddled and Petrick looked bored. The potential of the venture slipped away like sand, butchered by businessmen who couldn't find their ass with both hands. And then the murder was finished at last of this business which boomed in the not-distant past. Every fan knew the words kayfabe, mark, and more. A few blamed the sheets, but promoters told millions more. But what of Jim Herd, you ask with a shout? Couldn't Petrick or Turner force the old Grinch on out? Sad to say, the world of corporate affairs seems to guarantee that he'll always be there. So raising his fist, cursing under his breath, and condemning Dave Meltzer to a horrible death, he was heard to exclaim as he flew to St. Louis, I should have stuck with pizza. Wrestling, Ah, phooey.
Well, there you go. Did you send one to Herd?
Oh, he heard about it.
There are several people in that offices I know you sent it to, but did he get one?
Yeah, well, there was a few people that made sure that he saw all these things. As a matter, when I sent Jim Herd the wreath of black flowers, dead roses, and with the card that said, "Our deepest sympathies on the death of your wrestling promotion," that was when I was running Smoky Mountain in Knoxville, and he ran a show in the Omni that drew less than 1,000 people, and while I was drawing better than 1,000 people in a Knoxville Civic Coliseum. And so I sent him a wreath of black dead roses, and he, with that card, and he picked it up and carried it down and put it on Jim Ross's desk. And Jim Ross came in and saw the card and saw it wasn't to him, and he picked it up and carried it back to fucking Herd's desk and set it on his desk. Anyway, that was Christmas. I was a jolly old fellow back then, or a jolly young fellow, I guess. I had jolliness in me.
How much do you think the people that can't stand you hate the fact that you're clever?
Oh, it probably...
I heard couldn't stand you, and then it's like, God damn it, he's got another zinger. There he is again.
Yeah, it's God damn it. It's even more satisfactory that I can not only belittle these people, but in ways that they must deep down appreciate.
Do you ever feel the need, or have you since then, to write more poetry?
I've written a few poems, but they all mention Nantucket.
Ah.
Yeah, I haven't.
So you stole Lanny's material, I see.
Well, a little bit, and also the suit of armor. I'd like to have that standing in the corner of the office here. But I may do a bit more poetry if it comes. I need more spare time to sit back Cornette Creek and reflect under the oak tree.
You know, they say that Lanny Poffo wearing the suit of armor is what made it even more impressive when he blew himself.
Well, that's how he hurt his ribs that time. Had to take some time off. Those things are not hinged in the middle.